guns, and money.
Fair, Dan. Let us transition to our last topic. Then I know we have 2, 3 questions in the chat. So Dan, I'm going to give you the floor here. We have, last I checked, 50 states in the country because I was just watching maps for the last week, which was so much fun. But we have 50 states in the country, Dan. My sources tell me that we moved 3 steps closer to having all 50 states in the country having legalized sports betting. Why don't you give us kind of the, now that the dust is cleared, the smoke is cleared, all the particles in the air have now cleared and we can see the sports betting landscape. What states have legalized, which ones were shut down? Where do we stand on that front?
Well, I think there's so much ink being devoted to the 3 states that passed referenda on election day. That actually underscores how difficult it is to pass a sports betting law. We're never going to get to 50 states. Because Utah, Utah, Hawaii.
Steve Cohen is the owner of the Mets. Okay, no one thought that was going to happen, especially de Blasio. Keep going.
What happened on election day was that Maryland, South Dakota, and Louisiana had to determine at the ballot at a general election whether sports betting is something that the legislature could authorize and proscribe rules for. And the reason that went to a ballot question is because of state constitutions in a number of states. Almost every state constitution has some type of prohibition against either lotteries, casinos, or in some states, just all forms of gambling. And it takes a voter initiative to amend the Constitution in order to allow, gambling or sports betting. So it's a multi-year process. And I think Wall Street responded to the news of 3 ballot referenda passing when there was no opposition, as if it were like a game changer. And all it is, in my view, is a reminder that it takes a long time to pass a sports betting law. Right now, New York State has casino-based sports betting by virtue of a constitutional amendment that was done 7 years ago to allow up to 7 casinos, and the sports betting that was authorized by statute is in conformity with the state constitutional requirement that the betting take place at the casinos. But now New York State wants to have mobile wagering, but did not have the foresight 7 years ago to write legislation that would include mobile wagering. It was brick and mortar only, and Governor Cuomo is standing on the state constitution as a barrier to the legalization of mobile wagering. His position is that you're expanding gambling beyond the 7 casinos that the Constitution allows, because all the customers, all the bettors, they're located in their homes in Long Island, in Queens, in the Bronx, in Buffalo. They're not at these casinos. So because of this constitutional question, New York is really at it's at a standstill legislatively while the state assembly and the state senate want to move forward and pass and approve legislation to allow mobile betting. Cuomo's not going to sign the bill into law, and if he doesn't sign the bill into law, it will never come to a vote in the New York State Assembly. And these issues, these constitutional prohibitions and restrictions, are going to be the story and the watchword of 2021 in sports betting, because we're the 3 biggest states in the country. California, number 1, Texas, number 2, Florida, number 3. You're close. All of those states, each one of those 3 states representing about 1/4 of our population, have fairly broad constitutional prohibitions against either casino gambling or lottery. And it raises the question as to whether sports betting is a subset of casino gambling. And that's what, as lawyers, I think it's important to understand not only the legislative process, but the interaction between state legislative authority and constitutional restrictions. And I think that's where the rubber meets the road in 2021. And those will be the major stories as to whether California, New York, Florida, and Texas can get over that hurdle, because unless they do, they're going to remain on the outside looking in for sports betting. But at least in the near term, I think there's positive signs for Massachusetts and Ohio, and incrementally as we move forward every year, there'll be pockets of states that legalize sports betting, but the largest ones in the country are stuck in this constitutional conundrum. I think that will play out a little bit more vibrantly in 2021. I think we're going to start to get to the heart of those controversies and see whether there are lawsuits over it or whether the legislature will enact a sports betting law, even in the face of a potential lawsuit over its constitutionality. And it's that same constitutional question which is now placing the future of daily fantasy sports in New York under a cloud, because the New York legislature enacted a daily fantasy sports law in 2016, even though the state constitution may have required the citizens of New York to weigh in on that. So there's a court case going on in the New York Court of Appeals, and we may very well see the demise, at least in New York, of daily fantasy sports for at least a couple of years, depending on how that court case is decided.
I'm going to pretend you didn't just say that, because we're not dampering the mood here, that we're killing daily fantasy sports in New York, Dan. That's kind of a bombshell that you might have just dropped. But I'm a little nervous because when you make those predictions, you're not normally wrong. So, we have a Friday the 13th coming up. So I feel like this might be like a bizarro April Fool's joke that you just pulled on us.
Well, I say a few things more candidly on a podcast than I would on Twitter. On Twitter, it sort of takes hold. On a podcast, I think you can get into trouble sometimes. It's a little bit more free flowing and you say things that you may not be willing to tweet. But that's a case worth watching. It's a New York Court of Appeals. A New York Court of Appeals case. We're waiting for oral argument to be scheduled. And if the Court of Appeals affirms and follows the rationale of the trial court and the Intermediate Court of Appeals, we may very well have a final judgment that daily fantasy sports was improperly enacted by the legislature in 2016, and that daily fantasy sports constitutes gambling under not only the New York penal law, but the New York State Constitution. And that would mean that DraftKings and FanDuel might have to cease their DFS activities in New York State until the Constitution is amended.
You keep saying that, but that's not actually going to happen, right? New York.
You could move. Are you close to New Jersey?
I'm borderline in Connecticut, but I grew up in New York. So,